Day 4 of the Siege of the Alamo, February 26, 1836. A chilling north wind and temperatures in the 30s marked the start of the 4th day of the siege. The Mexican artillery batteries fired on the Alamo, and according to Almonte and Filasola, the Texians responded sparingly. They were dealing with a crisis in the compound. On the first day of the siege, I told you that the Texians had started to dig a well to give them a water source inside the walls. Well, it wasn't giving enough water to quench the thirst of all the men, women, and children inside, so some of the Texian defenders sallied forth from the Alamo to get some water and probably some wood. While the walls offered some relief from the biting north wind, it was still cold and fires would help. Some gathered wood and water, while others provided cover when, according to Filasola, advanced sentries fired on them. A skirmish ensued, and the Texians retreated back into the Alamo. Now, nasty weather and lack of provisions behind Mexican lines kept activity to a minimum for several days. So, we're going to cover about a week's worth of ground in this video as we speed toward the final assault. Day 5 of the siege, February 27th, 1836. On the 5th day, another cold one, a foraging party was sent out to scare up some grub for the Mexican soldados. With the homes of San Antonio already pillaged for calories, the party was dispatched to the ranches of Erasmo Seguin and his neighbors, a few miles outside of San Antonio, in search of hogs, cattle, corn, whatever they could get their hands on. Assuming the Texians were dependent on water from the acequia, Mexican troops just cut off access to it. Now the defenders had to redouble their well-digging efforts to stay hydrated. The entrenched camp in the La Villita area was completed, but Santa Anna refused to give it his seal of approval. Instead, he ordered General Amador to supervise the construction of another camp in the same vicinity, but closer to the Alamo. The Texians took notice of this, and they poured a heavy fire into the Mexican ranks, which they kept up well into the night. Santa Anna had written for reinforcements 2 days ago. His plan was to make a final assault on the Alamo once his backup arrived, and then use that larger force to steamroll the Texian settlements to the east. Today he wrote for provisions, particularly salt and money, to be sent by forced marches to San Antonio. Day 6 of the siege, February 28th, 1836. On day 6, and we're about halfway through and speeding toward the final assault, Texian reinforcements still did not arrive at the Alamo. Down in Goliad, James Fannin had received Travis's plea for aid on the 25th and had begun the 90-mile trek to San Antonio. It did not go well. Fannin's men were hungry, they wore threadbare clothes, some were shoeless. Morale was about as high as you'd figure it would be under those circumstances. Hauling 4 artillery pieces through the mud was taxing on the oxen and made for some slow going. The relief party only got about 2 miles from Presidio La Bahia before giving up. But the rumor mill was grinding away among the Mexican officers back in San Antonio. They hadn't gotten the memo about Fannin's failure to launch, so they believed there were some 200 reinforcements on the way from Goliad. Tomorrow, Santa Anna would act on this faulty intel. If you've ever heard the story of David Crockett staging an impromptu fiddle concert within the walls of the Alamo, this is when that is said to have happened. Later reminiscences of the siege from non-combatants who survived say that David Crockett played on the fiddle often, but there's no source material that says he put on any big show on this, the 6th day of the siege, but it does make for a good story. Day 7 of the siege, February 29th, 1836. On day 7, Santa Anna sent a few detachments to cut off the reinforcements he thought were coming from Goliad. In his instructions to General Joaquin Ramirez y Sesma, we see 2 themes emerge. He advised Sesma to make a dawn attack on Fannin's men to gain the element of surprise, and reminded him, in this war, you know there are no prisoners. Enrique Esparza, a boy at the time of the siege, recalled what he called an armistice, a ceasefire of sorts, of 3 days beginning right about now. During the next 3 days of relative quiet, several Tejanos from Seguin's company left the Alamo. Santa Anna himself wrote that he still wanted to try a generous measure characteristic of Mexican kindness, and offered life to the defenders who would surrender their arms. The message, he said, was sent through Colonel Almonte, and the reply was that the Texians intended to renew fire at some future hour. That seems to be how things played out. A few days ceasefire makes sense if you're inside the Alamo awaiting reinforcements, and it makes sense from a Mexican perspective if you're holding off a final assault until your own reinforcements arrive and some of your men are down on Goliad Road trying to prevent Texian reinforcements from arriving. Day 8 of the siege, March 1st, 1836. Well after midnight, a group of 32 men made it safely inside the walls of the Alamo. Today, we call them the Immortal 32, the reinforcements from Gonzales. Among that number were 2 men of the Alamo garrison sent out as messengers earlier in the siege, John Smith and Albert Martin, whose father had begged him not to return to San Antonio. The men from Gonzales likely brought news that even more reinforcements were being raised. The sun came up on a clear winter day, with temperatures in the mid-30s courtesy of another norther the night before. The Mexican detachments who had been waiting down the Goliad Road to ambush Texian reinforcements but encountered none, gave up and returned to San Antonio. The Texians, probably feeling bolstered by the arrival of some actual reinforcements and the promise of more, ended any ceasefire that was in place by firing 2 12-pound cannonballs in the vicinity of Santa Anna's quarters. One actually hit its mark, the other not so much. Day 9 of the siege, March 2nd, 1836. Though neither the defenders inside the walls or the Centralists outside the walls could have known it, Texas declared its independence from Mexico on this day at Washington on the Brazos. Santa Anna moved his Jimenez battalion closer to the Alamo and sent word to some of his reinforcements to get there by forced marches by noon the next day. Things were quiet. The calm before the storm continues. Day 10 of the siege, March 3rd, 1836. James Butler Bonham, who had left the Alamo before the siege began, today returned with news in the form of a letter from Robert Williamson, aka Three-Legged Willie, dated March 1st. Williamson beseeched Travis to hold out until reinforcements could arrive, and to that end, he said that in Gonzales they were awaiting some 300 men from San Felipe, Brazoria, Bastrop, and Washington, who would head to San Antonio with all dispatch as soon as they were collected. While the promise of reinforcements arrived inside the walls of the Alamo, real reinforcements amassed outside. 3 of the battalions Santa Anna had summoned had arrived, totaling more than 800 men. Work commenced digging trenches on the north, south, and east sides of the Alamo to further cut the defenders off from water and to make it harder for reinforcements to enter should any arrive. Travis mentioned these new entrenchments in his final letters from the Alamo, written on this day. To the government of Texas, the status of which he was not sure about, he asked again for men, ammunition, and provisions. Not knowing where to send official correspondence, he sent the letter to Jesse Grimes, who, unbeknownst to Travis, had signed the Texas Declaration of Independence the day before. To Grimes, whose 19-year-old son was one of the Alamo defenders, Travis wrote, "I am still here, in fine spirits and well-to-do, with 145 men. They are now encamped in entrenchments on all sides of us. Let the convention go on and make a declaration of independence, and we will then understand, and the world will understand, what we are fighting for. If independence is not declared, I shall lay down my arms, and so will the men under my command. But under the flag of independence, we are ready to peril our lives 100 times a day, and to drive away the monster who is fighting us under a blood-red flag, threatening to murder all prisoners, and make Texas a waste desert." To his friend David Ayers, Travis wrote, "Take care of my little boy. If the country should be saved, I may make for him a splendid fortune. But if the country be lost, and I should perish, he will have nothing but the proud recollection that he is the son of a man who died for his country." According to Juana Navarro Alsbury, James Bowie, still alive but too sick to be effective, was carried out of his room to talk with the defenders, the women, and the children. Even an ailing Bowie boosted morale. Day 11 of the siege, March 4th, 1836. In the Mexican Centralist camp, today was a day for decision-making. Should they wait for the remainder of the army on its way with field artillery pieces, or just conduct the final assault ASAP? Should they try to breach the walls, or should they go over them? Santa Anna again stressed that no prisoners would be taken, which caused consternation among his officers, some of whom took issue with the idea of executing prisoners. But Santa Anna's example was Joaquin Arredondo, who ordered hundreds of Mexicans to be hanged after the Battle of Medina in 1813. No decision was made on when the assault on the Alamo would take place. The only takeaway from the Council of War was that any prisoners taken in the assault would be executed. His Excellency made it clear that this was not up for negotiation. According to Susanna Dickinson and the account of Philisola, 1 or 2 Tejana women from inside the Alamo made their way into one of the Mexican encampments, relaying precisely how many defenders were inside the walls, as well as the state of their provisions, ammunition, and morale. Confirmation of this state of affairs seems to have made the final assault decision for Santa Anna. They would not wait for the field artillery pieces to arrive to end the siege. Preparations would begin immediately. Tomorrow, day 12, all hands inside and outside the walls of the Alamo would be busy. Until then, God in Texas, y'all.